Let me just start off by saying that every single Nintendo Switch game that you own is technically a limited run. Now, of course, this same way of thinking works for all games, no matter what the console, because, well, they're obviously not making new NES copies of classic games like the Multi-Kart Mario and Duck Hunt game now, are they? Nope. And sure, this is a bit of an extreme example, and don't worry, they've made about 28 million variants of those. What I'm getting at is that you don't need to go to a company like Limited Run to get a limited run game, because you probably have true limited runs in your collection already and don't even realise it. Every single game, whether the distributor tells you this or not, is technically a limited run because they can only make a limited amount of them. In the case of Nintendo for the Switch, the minimum limited quantity is 5,000 for the US, 3,000 in the UK, and 2,000 in Asian territories. Which means that when a slightly lesser known title or a limited edition of a popular game is released, when it inevitably sells out, especially when people don't realise it's on a limited print run, for the most part, it's going to go up in price. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 The Torna Edition is a perfect example. After it sold out, when people heard that it had a limited print run, it went for almost double the original price, before calming down but still asking for a good amount online. Skylanders for the Switch, yes, the Switch, came out right around the death of the IP, and therefore very few games were made compared to the extreme amount made for older systems. Expect to pay well over $100 and in some cases close to $200 for this now. All of the Neptuna games are shooting up in price. Monster Boy, as in the original first run of Monster Boy that includes all of the stickers, also had an unknown limited print run, and sure, even though newer print runs by other companies that look far better have again helped push the value down of the original print run, because this edition is more sought after, expect to pay roughly the same amount for this as the far greater limited edition. And you know what's crazy? As of 2023, the Nintendo Switch is still relevant. As of right now, it is Nintendo's, the fourth biggest video game company in the world's only system. The mind boggles as to what hidden gems can be found in here and what they're going to be worth within the next generation or two into the future. And sure, even though that's not why I buy my games, let's put that scummy hat on for just one video and go and buy a game that, honestly, I don't really have that much interest in, simply because I predict that it will be worth more money in the future.
Get ready.
Toasty!
This is the Outbound Ghost, and it cost me £30 from a local Argos. And if you go looking online, you can get it much cheaper for both the Switch and the PlayStation 4. It's not an expensive game, but if things keep going the way they are going, it soon will be. Because the only way you can play the Outbound Ghost on the Switch is by buying this physical cartridge. Sure, limited run type companies such as Super Rare Games often tend to do this, but those are games that they have partly funded, and the fact that they are physical only is more of a marketing thing as opposed to anything else. Plus, they are apparently going to be released up on itch.io in the future anyway. But as far as the Outbound Ghost goes, looking up the Switch trailer on YouTube provides you with a link to the store that goes to nothing, and the same goes for the PC trailer too. Nothing. And finally, the store page on PlayStation just says announced, aka nothing. Even though the game is obviously out. Now, this is more common than you may think, and in almost every single instance when a game is delisted after it's been released physically, guess what? The physical prices shoot up until it's rectified. 9 times out of 10, it's due to a brand deal in the game running out, or far more boring, it's due to a handover from one publisher to another. But this is different. The only reason you can get this physically is because of what happened on Kickstarter.
I wanna take you for a ride.
Back in July of 2021, Conradical Games opened up the Kickstarter for the Outbound Ghost, a very, very small indie studio that had a couple of smaller games behind them that never really took off, such as Gearbox and Lootbox Life, a puzzle game and a Metroidvania game respectively. Again, both games didn't exactly win any Game of the Year awards or sales chart awards, but they did get a positive response from gamers that wanted a newer version of the classics that they grew up with. And surprise, surprise, not only did Conradical Games deliver on that front, but they did it again with this game on Kickstarter. Heavily inspired by the Paper Mario series, the Outbound Ghost was an RPG with a Paper Mario aesthetic, obviously created by a hardcore RPG fan, or to be more specific, a hardcore Octopath Traveler and Undertale fan. The Paper Mario stylings ended up becoming an accidental evolution of that. Originally teased back in May of 2020, the Outbound Ghost plays like the games just mentioned, but with a slightly more Tim Burton-esque morbid feel, helping your mates working through several stages of grief and in turn gaining new abilities to help you make your way through the world. Obviously, this game pulled on the heartstrings of many a classic gamer, as only 32 hours later, the 9,000 Swiss franc target was met when 934 backers got it to 25,682 Swiss francs. The updates were fast and frantic, not only talking about the development, but also getting feedback and showing in great detail how each element of the game was thought up and made. In other words, it's the textbook example of how a campaign like this should be run. And then on the 13th of August 2021, only one day after the Kickstarter ended, Conrad went to Kickstarter to thank his backers, thanking them for allowing him to be able to create the game he wanted with absolutely no restrictions. Which isn't entirely true, because he also explains that he's been speaking with publishers who will hopefully be able to provide him with help with porting the game and virtually nothing else. Fast forward 7 months and Conrad has chosen said publisher, Digerati. But why? Didn't he just say that he has absolutely no restrictions because of the Kickstarter backers? Well, originally, the Outbound Ghost was actually going to be a game for someone more like me, the minority. An adventure puzzle game with a cool art style similar to the Paper Mario series. However, there's no getting away from the fact that this campaign was a success because people thought it would be more like Paper Mario, not just in its art style, but also its gameplay too. Just look at it. It's Paper Mario, goddammit. It obviously plays just like Paper Mario, right? No. The problem is, creating a Paper Mario-like game with true Paper Mario turn-based-like RPG elements means that it will be a far more cost-worthy project. And as much as he would have loved to do that very thing, he had decided against it because of, well, money. Long story short, a lot of people thought that the Outbound Ghost was going to be a Paper Mario type game, which it was never advertised to be such a game. That was until Digerati came along and with their cash injection and experience injection were able to give him enough funds to be able to make a Paper Mario styled game. As stated, not only did Conradical get the ability to make the game that many of his backers wrongfully expected it to be in the first place, but with the help of Digerati founder Nick Alfieri, they were able to get porting duties sorted too, something that previous vlogs from Conrad had shown he wasn't exactly having a 100% success rate with himself.
I had already confirmed this with the success of one of the Kickstarter stretch goals, but now we have an actual dedicated porting team that's going to get the games running super well on those platforms.
The relationship between the two sounded great, and as more devlogs came in, he would explain how Digerati are helping him here and there. In his own words,
In the end, I signed with Digerati and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them.
Through Digerati's contacts, they had hired another company called Bromeo to create the ports for the game, and again, Conrad was super happy with what they were doing too.
My publisher works with a studio called Bromeo to do all of the porting for their games. Sebastian and Cesar are two artists that work there and they help with environmental design. It was such a big help. The environments are so much more lively now.
That was September 20th, 2022, the day that this game was released, digitally on Steam and available for pre-order via Signature Edition Games. A company that I have used multiple times and I've always had a good experience with. And yes, it's because of this company that you was able to get this. and you can get yourself a physical copy of the game, as Merge and Signature are, for all intents and purposes, part of the same company. But ignore Signature Edition. It's because of Digerati that you're not able to play this game digitally. Or at least that's the opinion of most gamers online that have followed this closely. You see, during that collaboration between Conradical and Digerati, sadly, unfortunately, the founder of Digerati sadly passed away. Of course, this was terrible news, with plenty of well wishes getting shared around, and even though some people have spoken out against Nick's unprofessional treatment of developers, including someone who I spoke to personally that claims that Digerati supposedly held their physically published game for ransom behind a stupidly expensive and unachievable paywall. Before all of that came out, it was because of Nick that Conrad decided to go with Digerati in the first place, which you'll see proof of in just a minute. But first, when the game finally dropped onto consoles and gamers started getting their review copies of the Outbound Ghost, the game itself was received in a mostly positive light for the most part, gameplay wise. However, the major issue that they had, the shockingly low frame rate even in dock mode, the load times and the overall polish of that port. The entire game has a fuzzy low-res sheen over it that is quite apparent when comparing it to PC footage, said Nintendo Life. There are an awfully lot of completely blank, too long loading screens that keep making me think that my console is busted, said digitallydownloaded.net. Textures are notably blurry in handheld mode, making the text in battles practically unreadable, said ladiesgamers.com. The promised several editions of extra languages was also not included, which was brought up often, and supposedly one of those non-English speaking languages included a game-breaking bug that completely broke the game shortly after World 2, along with plenty of other porting issues.
Let's go fight him. Wow, this is long. Wow, this is long. That's absurd.
In the crazy world of video game review scoring, where a 70% score is somehow deemed average, and for the most part really the lowest you would ever want to go before picking up a copy of a game yourself, the Outbound Ghost was getting 50% all over the shop from fans and critics alike. And the reason for this was that it was simply just not ready to be released. Sadly, Digerati just didn't hold back the release date of this game as requested by Conrad himself after reviewing the ports, which of course instantly gave it these negative reviews and resulted in the following statement on Twitter. I've already received worrying messages concerning its performance. I never wanted this version of the game to come out, but due to circumstances out of my control, this was the one that was released. I'm doing everything I can to get the relevant parties to fix their mistakes. From this point on, Conrad went absolutely berserk on Twitter against Digerati, almost daily updating people that it's still not fixed. He showcased proof of his own game's laggy input and video proof of a game that even he himself deemed unplayable. And several days later, Conrad retweeted Digerati's response. We're aware of performance issues with the Switch version of the Outbound Ghost. The patch we all hoped would be available on day one is still in approval with Nintendo and should be released in the coming weeks. 2 days later, and the relationship breaks down even more when the Outbound Ghost goes on sale for a second time on Steam, something that Conrad did not approve and something that forced him to put out another statement asking people to share this information, calling out Digerati for bad business practices. In short, because Digerati just released a game without the developer's permission, according to the contracts, they just breached that contract. This resulted in a breach of contract notice from Conrad himself, who sent in a letter from his lawyer forcing a separation between the two parties, and it was here that he stated that the death of Nick does indeed play a role in this decision, as that has had an impact on the overall quality of the relationship between them. But on top of that, he of course goes into details about the terrible ports, stating that they were not approved by the developer before release, and finally goes into detail about payment defaults and delays to the company. All of this information was shared publicly on December 8th after Conrad put a video statement out explaining that the relationship has completely dissolved between himself and the publisher after Digerati refused to give ownership back of the many online stores. All he had was the Steam page, as that was set up before even the Kickstarter went live, where Digerati was, I assume, a moderator, and of course he also had full ownership of the Kickstarter page, where all of this information eventually dropped to all of the backers who helped make the game what it was. Keeping up? Well, it's because of this that Digerati then went ahead and sued Conradical Games because, according to them, he also breached his contract. And to be fair, I mean, he kind of did. Of course, emotions were high as he spent years creating the game almost on his own, but after the game was released and Conrad saw the issues gamers were having, he even went as far as to change the name of the game to "This game is no longer authorized by the developer on Steam." Something he was not allowed to do as part of the original contract. Hey, look, I don't like it either. I morally think that Conrad did the right thing here. However, it does state in the contract that he can't do this, and he signed that contract. Of course, he wouldn't have needed to do that if Digerati held up their end of the bargain, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's not down to us to decide who's right or wrong. It's down to the courts to decide. And it was here on February 16th that Conrad, after desperately attempting to get ownership of his game back from a company that was supposedly not even paying him any royalties, decided to DMCA his very own game, removing it from all storefronts that he didn't have control over. Now, according to this contract, Conrad can do this because he technically owns the IP and Digerati don't. A. Developer is the owner of all intellectual property rights in and to the licensed game, which has been or is being developed by developer for some or all of the platforms. B. Publisher is a publisher and distributor of video games. But again, in the same contract, it does state that Conrad would need written approval from the publisher before he makes any major changes to the storefronts, which I'm guessing he didn't get. In retaliation to all of this, the widow of Nick and now owner of the company put out a very formal reply, which wasn't exactly met with praise, especially considering she brought up her deceased husband and claimed that he used it as a way to get out of the contract.
Unfortunately, he has now wrongly told us that he is terminating our contract, even going so far as attempting to use the tragic and sudden death of my husband as grounds for termination. In addition, Conrad has unlawfully tampered with the Steam page and has attempted to take down the console versions as well. This isn't fair to us, and it isn't fair to you.
Which, as already explored, he kind of did, but it was just one element of many other reasons as to why he felt that the separation between the two companies needed to go ahead. This has now resulted in Conrad countersuing the publisher over everything previously mentioned, and that counter-argument goes into great public detail about how this entire scenario has damaged the reputation of Conradical Games, which I personally don't believe, as his next smaller game on Kickstarter was being promoted during this time, and because of all of this still being up in the air, it was getting more coverage than it probably would have done if the Outbound Ghost came out and everything was fine. Or another way of looking at it would be that if this game came out and did well, then it would have been the popularity of this game that would have boosted that Kickstarter. Who knows? At the end of the day, the Outbound Ghost is in a terrible position. The game itself, buggy ports aside, looks to be an above average game. The way I see it is that it could take literally years to be finalised. Hypothetically, if Digerati win, I honestly doubt they'll push for the promotion of a game that's already scored badly, sold badly, and will be seriously old hat by that point. And if Conradical wins, even though I have faith that Conrad will put all of the effort he can in to fix the port to the best of his ability, I again doubt any publisher will want to physically publish the game on the Switch. I mean, heck, the system is almost 6 years old by this point. Do you see much of a future for this game on this system? It's a sad, sad end to our story, and one that is still not over. Looking at the court documents from both companies putting their best evidence forward, it's fair to say that the vast majority of gamers, myself included, are behind the developer here. But at the same time, who knows how this will end up? I guess it all depends depends on how well they fight it out, because at the end of the day, a contract is a contract, and both parties legally do have some pretty solid arguments to back up their case. Links to all of the court documents that are currently available will be found down below, as well as a link to Digerati in case you are siding with them and want to see what they have to say about all of this. And of course, I'll also have a link to Conradical's new game on Steam too, where you can wishlist it if you're like me and want to side with him and support him on his future endeavours. And if you really want to see how buggy the Outbound Ghost is before the update is applied on the Switch, I've done a bit of a playthrough of the first several areas, which is available to all Patreons and YouTube members. Also, make sure you go and support Conrad, because this new game looks freaking amazing. I mean, seriously, come on. A Vampire Survivors indie game with a Paper Mario aesthetic? Sign me up. Hopefully an agreement can be met behind the scenes and he's able to fix this game and get it to the level it deserves, and hopefully it's not just another game that's going to shoot up in value due to its obscurity and unwarranted messy history.